There
Okay.
we go. Okay.
I just wanted to say a couple of things about Transition Time Media before we start, because I think everyone here is at least a little bit familiar with it, but just in case you aren't. So Transition Town Media is part of an international movement of transition towns that began in England back in 2006. And we're the first one in Pennsylvania, but since then there's been a bunch of others who've joined us in this state and around the country. And basically we try to we work to make communities more resilient in the face of climate change and economic instability and social injustice. So those are the three kind of pillars that we work towards. And basically we are looking at creating a new future based on a mindset that is more caring of people and the planet than money and institutions. So this work that we're doing here with biodiversity is just one of many platforms that we are involved in. We do local food initiatives, local economy, local energy, solarizing, and we run the free store, and just a bunch of different things. So that's basically what we're doing. Now I'll turn it over to Marion and Kelsey.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And welcome everyone to this webinar for all about native plants for biodiversity. My name is Kelsey Stanton, Kelsey Stanton Murphy, still getting used to that name change. I am a landscape designer and planner that works primarily for municipalities in Chester County. I'm a resident of the Media area in Delaware County, and I've been a native plant nut for several years, pretty much ever since I read Doug Tallamy. And I feel that there are many kindred spirits among us here. And if that name means nothing to you, don't worry, we will explain in detail. Marion?
Yeah, hi everyone, welcome. I'm really happy that you're joining us. This is my mission in life. I'm a retired RN and now taking care of the planet instead of patients, I mean. And I'm a master gardener, and my passion is climate crisis. And this is one of the ways that we can make a difference with climate crisis by protecting biodiversity, which is necessary for ecosystems, for healthy ecosystems, and ecosystems help regulate the climate. So that's why my passion is there, something that I can do in my yard. So take it away, Kelsey.
Excellent, yes, and that's a good jumping off point. This is something that we can all do in our yards. So we're going to start off with an introduction to Dr. Doug Tallamy. He is an entomologist and professor at the University of Delaware, who really connected the dots with the significance of native plants to the food base for so many of our food webs, insects. He's the one that really connected the dots on the significance of native insects to not only birds, as pictured here with that lovely bluebird, but fish, amphibians, you name it, they need it, we need them. And those insects develop best on native plants. So the importance of healthy ecosystems, which we're going to come back to again and again, the base of which in our area are the plants, and one's food level up, one energy level up from that, insects. These organisms that have evolved in our region over thousands of years to develop these complex interrelationships. Everything from pollination to nutrient storing and transmogrifying, water filtration, air cleaning of air, cooling of air. These are all ecosystem services, and they are most efficiently produced and most abundantly produced in healthy, complex ecosystems. And at the base of it all are plants. As Marion laid out in the beginning, in the introduction, climate is regulated by healthy ecosystems, which depend upon biodiversity. And that biodiversity depends on having enough insects at the base of it, well, plants at the base of it, then one step up insects, and then from there branching off into everything that eats those insects. And right there at the bottom, we lay out the point, the right plants that are needed in our ecosystems are natives, those that have, and we will define, we're going to use Doug Tallamy's definition of native plants as those that have evolved in a given region over a long enough period of time, again, to support and develop complex interrelationships with the other living organisms of that region. So if you want to see these birds in your landscape, we got the chickadee, we've got the downy woodpecker, we've got the blue jay, we've got the ruby-throated hummingbird, the goldfinch, the bluebird, the white-breasted nuthatch, the northern flicker, cardinals. You really want to plant native plants. Forsythia, other things like that that are Asian or European. Yes, they will provide cover. Yes, they will provide some pollination services for insects, but those are only one or two functions in a landscape. Native plants are best suited to fulfilling multiple functions in a landscape, in your landscape, in our landscape. And the creatures that they snack on are dragonflies, swallowtail butterflies, spiders, caterpillars, a multitude of native insects that have evolved over eons to subsist on the plants that have evolved here. So why do we care about dragonflies or butterflies? Besides being beautiful, they are absolutely essential for our landscapes, our ecosystems to properly function. I've mentioned pollination services, but also they recycle nutrients, dead wood, dead plant material, dead animal material, and incorporate the nutrients locked into that debris into the soil for other organisms to take up, to take advantage of. And also through parasitism, predation, they control other insect pests. They provide that balance in our landscape to prevent any one individual species from taking over. There is increasing evidence of widespread declines in a number of insect species, whether we have heard of colony collapse disorder, the decline of the honeybee, an introduced pollinating insect from Eurasia. But at the same time, we've seen declines in our native bee species, in fireflies. There was a study done in Germany that found widespread declines in just flying insects in natural areas. These places that are supposed to be able to support these insects have seen up to 75% decline in species diversity. This is very alarming. because, as we've pointed out before, we can't survive without these insects. And the majority of these insects, as I've stated before, require native plants to complete their development, as is the case with this little striped oakworm moth larva, caterpillar, on a red oak leaf. So
Wow.
right here,
What a stuff.
so insect loss impacts birds, everything that eats insects, and everything that depends on those insects in other ways, including us. And that's a lovely picture of a prothonotary warbler. I can never pronounce that correctly, with a beak full of invertebrates ready to feed his or her babies. We try and credit every single image in this PowerPoint. We don't want to get in trouble. So,
let me make a comment. Go back
yes.
a minute, Kelsey.
Yes, thank you,
If this
Marianne.
food source is taken away, all these animals starve to death. And this has already been happening. This summer or last summer, hundreds of thousands of birds were dropping dead out of the sky in some of the Western states. And the reason was that they were starving to death. So it's already happening, which just enforces the point of how important it is for us to plant natives in our gardens so that they have something to eat to keep them alive.
Yes. And if I recall correctly, Marianne, a significant portion of those birds that had dropped dead were migratory.
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of these beautiful birds in our area, such as our friend the prothonotary on the screen here, our gray catbirds, which have just started to show up, they are what are called neotropical migrants, which means that they are here during the growing season, during the mid to late spring, all throughout the fall, to take advantage of our explosion of insect life. And then during the winter time, they migrate down either to the southern extent of our country or down into the Caribbean, down to Central or South America to continue the insect eating party down there and to avoid cold temperatures. So these tiny little birds that may weigh less than a handful of pennies migrate hundreds to thousands of miles. They need significant protein and fat stores to make that journey, and they need that energy in the form of insects. So we need our landscapes to provide that. And as we'll keep hammering the point away, the best way to do that is to plant native plants. So why are pollinators declining? This commission for the EU found that in the case of European pollinators, the number one cause was the intensive use, the conversion of habitat for intensive agricultural management, the creation of these monocultural landscapes that don't offer any food and that lay on the pesticides. Followed closely by climate change, which will change every aspect of our lives, environmental pollution, and invasive species and diseases. I don't know of any parallel study that has been done on this side of the Atlantic on the causes of declining insects, but we can be sure it is probably a very similar picture here.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is so much of our area is in suburban residential land. We want space, we want peace and quiet. Our landscapes don't really support the biodiversity that we depend upon. Because for generations, we have been taught that the best plants to plant are ornamentals from another country. And we think it's time for a paradigm shift. Most popular alien plant, turf grasses. We love our lawns. It is, I think, the #1 irrigated crop in this country. NASA did a satellite imagery survey of the country, and I don't even remember the figure, but it's something to the order of 50,000 square miles of land is in turf grass. And it's a green desert. We irrigate it, we mow it, we fertilize it, and it supports maybe a handful of bugs, most of them not very good. Our gardens, unfortunately, as we were talking about earlier, can also be full of alien plants, butterfly bush, bamboo, burning bush, English ivy, barberry, purple loosestrife. All of these admittedly beautiful plants that at worst don't fully support the life that surrounds us, and at worst escapes our landscapes and invades surrounding natural areas, as is the case with bamboo burning, well, all of the above. All 6 of these guys have been found to invade natural areas. The impact, this is a landscape that has been dominated by invasive Japanese stiltgrass. In the foreground there at the bottom left corner, we have autumn olive. Looking a little farther back, there's a bunch of invasive vines over there. Some of these plant species in this picture hitchhiked. They were used as packing material, as is the case of Japanese stiltgrass. And some of them were planted with really good intentions. The autumn olive was planted as a windbreak, a soil improver because it fixes nitrogen, and it was planted to feed the birds. So it was planted with really good intentions, but unfortunately, all of these factors make it perfect for invading other areas, getting out of bounds, and effectively outcompeting the native plants that were surrounding it, that can no longer that were elbowed out of this space. So how do we restore biodiversity to our landscapes? I think you all know the answer by now. Plant native and stop planting alien invasive species. We're not here to hammer you over the head and say, rip out that forsythia, rip out
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Our point here is you can still have some, please, sorry, let me start over. Don't rely heavily on non-native species. Improve your area's habitat value with more native plant species. And I think the next slide, yep, has a few examples of what we're talking about here. A lot of our native plants have exceptional landscape value. You have cardinal flower, you have scarlet bee balm, you have oak trees, you have maidenhair fern. And the big 5 on this slide offer they offer the highest landscape value to that base of our food web, the native insects, and then stepping up from there, all of the species that depend upon them. Native
I just want to mention with goldenrod, a lot of people think that causes allergies, and it does not.
Right.
It has nothing to do with allergies. It's a perfectly fine plant to have in your garden. And actually, it's one of the big 5 according to Doug Tallamy.
Yes, its pollen is actually too sticky and too heavy to be released into the wind and impact those of us with seasonal allergies. Um, it's the scapegoat. It blooms at the same time as ragweed, and
Mhm.
that's the culprit. So goldenrod is a great plant. And for those of you who may automatically think of Canada goldenrod, which is a garden thug, there are dozens of species of goldenrod, from woodland blue stem goldenrod all the way up to showy or anise scented goldenrod, um, that behave themselves, um, and really bring that late season wonderful color and pollinator value, to your landscapes. All right, so oak trees, cherry trees, goldenrod, native sunflower. Maybe you automatically think of the annual sunflower, or the sunflower that provides maybe you with seeds for snacking. We also have dozens of native perennial sunflowers. This right here, I think, is woodland sunflower, or perhaps swamp sunflower. We have dozens of them, of varying habits, bloom times, sizes to suit your particular landscape needs. And likewise with asters. So what are we talking about as far as how much to plant? And as far as Dr. Tallamy's recommendations, if you want to bring in the native insects, again, that are the basis for our ecosystems, uh, we recommend planting at least 70% of your landscape with native plants. That will provide uh, just the sheer weight of caterpillars, sawfly larvae, etc., that will feed the birds, and also biodiversity of species. So that if, for example, I don't know, tulip tree beauty caterpillar becomes a moth, it feeds exclusively on tulip tree. If their numbers crash at some point, in a given year for whatever reason, you will still have all of these other species ready and waiting to feed the birds and other species in your yard.
Yeah, this may sound daunting, 70% of your garden, but you work towards it. It's not like you have to run out
Yes.
and do it overnight. I mean, it would be a really heavy duty job to do that, but working towards this with the goal of 70%, makes it a little bit easier to handle.
Exactly. Yes. Some other things that we can do is to stop using pesticides, particularly on the lawn. I have a little asterisk there, because uh, as a landscape designer, um, there are times when you have to, it's using pesticides as a one and done just to get rid of the worst thugs in a given landscape. Sometimes that's the most cost effective thing to do.
Yeah.
That
The,
being said, don't rely on them.
the only time I ever used a pesticide on my property was when I killed a huge poison ivy vine. It must have been a 3-inch diameter I squirted Roundup on it. And that's the only time I've ever used Roundup on my property, but that was necessary to get rid of that poison ivy.
Yes.
Other than that, no, I wouldn't use it.
Reduce your lawn. Again, this is something that you can do incrementally. Start by maybe planting a tree, and then next year planting a few natives around that tree, and then create these little tiny islands that over the years you can connect to form larger and larger beds. And that way you have one less chore, one smaller chore to do on the weekends when we'd all rather be gardening.
Yeah, what is this grass here, Kelsey? Do you know?
So this is a patch of, I think it's Sporobolus, prairie dropseed, which is a native warm
Mm.
season prairie grass. I don't know what those cute little flower heads are popping up in it. I suspect it's an ornamental onion. But this is on the Scott Arboretum. This is on Swarthmore's campus,
Mhm.
formerly lawn, transferred over to prairie grass. Transition from alien plants to natives. These are the asters, the sunflowers, and the goldenrod that we've mentioned before. If you've got a lot of ground to cover, trumpet creeper is a phenomenal vine. It's an enthusiastic vine that hummingbirds absolutely adore. Add native shrubs for shelter and for privacy. Privacy for you, shelter for you, and for the birds. And if particularly adding these hedgerows of varied different native shrubs from left to right, we've got mountain laurel, we've got Virginia witch hazel, and we've got oak leaf hydrangea, which offers a diversity of bloom times, bloom shapes, and different resources that different species can utilize. And consider talking to your neighbors to add hedgerows as well. And as if we connect these dots, we provide these corridors that birds and other species can utilize to move throughout the landscape. Please don't buy invasive plants. I know winged euonymus or burning bush offers really phenomenal fall color, but we have other species in this country that offer that phenomenal color and don't jump out, escape into our natural areas and elbow out other species. Get outside help when needed. We've listed several landscape design and landscape install services that serve this area and whose mission of creating multifunctional landscapes that are both beautiful and helpful to wildlife. That's their ethos as well. Join your local Native Plant Society. In our area, that's the Pennsylvania Native Plant Society. We've also listed a number of other organizations to support, and that Marion was kind enough to send out as an email earlier with similar resources or similar ideas that you can take advantage of. Enlist your kids. Start them young, indoctrinate them. Get kids into the landscape, get them interested in the butterflies and the dragonflies, in all of the different wildlife that will take advantage of your habitat-friendly backyard, and you will have a conservationist for life.
Yay.
Yes. Again, talk to your neighbors. If one of the residents of this housing development were to create a native plant hedgerow, perhaps fill in among those spruce trees with winterberry holly or oak leaf hydrangea, and then talk to their neighbors about the wonderful birds and bees that they see, and get their neighbors excited about it. Right across that path there is a native meadow that's mowed once a year, and beyond that is a native woodland. And what that neighborhood can do is create a corridor for birds, bees, etc., to move throughout the landscape and move into those native areas and just be able to persist in our landscapes. So some more pointers from this book that has really galvanized Marion and I and so many others into improving our yards, into becoming more habitat friendly. Um, Caterpillars are key. So many birds feed their young almost exclusively on caterpillars. There might be a few spiders or soft fly larvae or something like that in there, but it's mostly caterpillars that they feed their young on. And so if you don't have enough caterpillars in the landscape, those birds, those chickadees, those bluebirds, etc., they're not going to be able to successfully raise their next batch of babies. Just 5% of native plants produce food for 75% of the caterpillars in our area. And those natives, those really high-powered natives were the species that we talked about earlier, our oak trees. Oak trees support over 500 different species of caterpillar. Our cherry trees, 450 species of caterpillar. And then I think we go down to goldenrod, aster, and sunflower, which each support something like 70 to 100 species of caterpillar. They pull more than their own weight in the landscape. As we try to bring home in this PowerPoint, all yards are important. If we can increase the diversity of native plants in our yards, we will support the nature around us and bring in more of those ecosystem services that benefit us all. Land stewardship is everyone's responsibility, which means we've all got to get dirty and rip out that barberry, removing the invasives. And what might be a great topic for later blog posts or webinar is don't rely so much on cultivars. That lovely, what is it? It's a red-leafed penstemon, Husker red penstemon. It's a cultivar of a native penstemon to our region that was selected for absolutely gorgeous red foliage. Unfortunately, the color red comes from a particular chemical in leaves called anthocyanins, and that was developed by plants to deter insect herbivory. So a red-leafed cultivar is going to support fewer insects. And I wish I knew this before I went out and bought a whole bunch of Husker red penstemon. So don't rely on cultivars. There's more research coming out on this that we hope to share moving forward. So you are nature's best hope. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. We're going to share resources next to help you increase your habitat value. But please know that everything that you do to improve the amount of native plants in your landscape is going to pay dividends in terms of pollinators, birds, wildlife in general. These are some of the books that inspired us and that we reference in this presentation. So it all started with Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy. He followed up with Nature's Best Hope. He and landscape architect Rick Dark collaborated on The Living Landscape, which is full of inspirational photos, helpful tips, and a really great chart at the back that outlines native plants and details the specific resources that they provide in your landscape. And Nature Play at Home by Nancy Stranist, which is great for, again, bringing the little ones in. So this is that chart I was talking about. This is just a sampling of some of the species of plants that the Living Landscape covers. And you can see each of these, so you have the scientific name, the common name, and then a chart that details whether or not they're good for bees. They provide nectar for hummingbirds and other insects, whether they're supportive of breeding birds. The blue flying bird signifies it's good for spring migrants. The orange flying bird signifies that it's great for fall migrating birds. Caterpillars, pretty self-explanatory. It's great for feeding insects, and so on and so forth. And there's that key that I was attempting to explain. So you can see here, I mean, birches are fantastic. They support over 400 species of caterpillars, and there's a few other interesting tidbits about each of these plants. Some more, so if you want to find out about what native plants are in your landscape, the Audubon Society, the Mount Cuba Center in Delaware, and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center are all fantastic online resources for finding out different species. And right at the top, the Homegrown National Park Initiative is, that came out of Doug Tallamy's work. I think that came out of his book, Nature's Best Hope. And Marion, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love this concept. This is his idea. It's a huge initiative by Doug Tallamy to get everyone to plant natives throughout the country so that we have a corridor of food for our insects, our birds, and all of our other wildlife. And once you are planting native plants, you can get on his map. I'm on the map. 2 of my neighbors are on the map because I encourage them to plant natives, and they're doing it. So I would encourage you to go to his website, Homegrown National Park Initiative. It's very inspiring, and he has a ton of research on there. And a lot of information. It's great. It's one of the best websites you can go to. And I just wanted to make a comment. We have a couple questions in the chat, and we can get to those after you finish this, Kelsey, okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so more information about creating habitat at home. For some reason, when I was making this slide, I really wanted to nail in the importance of the Homegrown National Park Initiative, so that's there. But also our own State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Ecological Landscaping, or the Ecological Landscape Alliance has an excellent article about creating native hedges and hedgerows. At the bottom is the Xerces Society, named for a species of butterfly that is phenomenal for resources that support our local invertebrates. A series of videos that you can watch more about the Bringing Nature Home book with Doug Tallamy, the E.O. Wilson Foundation, talking about saving biodiversity, more about the Homegrown National Park, and a video from Business Insider that talks about the significance of insects. And again, this a recording of this will be made available, so you don't have to really quick scribble down those resources.
Well, I sent them all out. Anyhow,
Oh,
so
fantastic.
got
Okay.
them.
All right. So again, where to buy native plants? There are several native plant nurseries in our region. Very close to us is Redbud Native Plant Nursery over in Media. Not too far away is Yellow Springs Farm up in Chester Springs. Edge of the Woods Native Plant Nursery up in Orfield. All the way up in New Hope is Bowman's Hill, which both offers native plants for sale and is a phenomenal natural area to explore. And then in Philadelphia is good host plants. Native plant gardens to visit. Mount Cuba Center is an absolutely phenomenal resource not too far away from us. It was a DuPont property that transitioned to, its mission now is to plant, propagate, protect, and educate people about the native plants of our region. But also Stoneleigh Native Plant Garden in Villanova, Tyler Arboretum, Jenkins Arboretum, Scott Arboretum, and Bartram's Garden are all local resources that have a majority of native plants. They have a few other ornamental plants in there. And then if you need help with implementing more native plants in your landscape, these are a few of the firms in the area that are a really good resource. Those organizations that we were talking about that are great for educating about native plants and improving habitat in your yard or in your community. And more further reading, there was a question in the chat talking about evergreen lawn alternatives. That tree hugger article might be right up your alley. Personally, I find that I think that tree hugger article references sedges, native sedges. That I think that those are fantastic lawn alternatives.
Not mine. They're too hard to handle.
Okay, all right. So more information about Transition Town Media is available at the website. And if you have any particular questions following up this webinar or just in general, feel free to email us at biodiversity@transitiontownmedia.org. So shall we go into Q&A?
Yeah, can everyone unmute now if you haven't already? So we can chat.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other better.
Okay.
So I see in the chat, good ground covers under oak tree to replace English ivy. I said earlier, native sedges are phenomenal. They are a grass-like perennial that offer seasonal interest, really interesting seed heads that feed wildlife. Their foliage is a source of food for caterpillars. So native sedges are a great one. Native phlox is a great one as well. Everyone thinks of the summer blooming garden phlox, and that's a great one, which is also native. But there's also spring blooming woodland or creeping phlox that's actually in bloom now. It blooms in shades of blue or white or purple, and that will eventually spread to become nice, well-behaved patches of butterfly supporting ground cover.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I have that in my garden.
I'm joining the current person asking about if you could distinguish between the shade loving plants and those that need sun. I have, yeah.
Yes. So, all right. Do these ground covers take shade? And Linda, you have the same question. Yes, the answer is yes. Both sedges and phlox take shade. Dappled all the way to fairly constant shade. If you're, say, in an apartment building that's bordered on all four sides by really tall brick buildings, and so the sun never shines in that particular courtyard, you're going to have a hard time establishing pretty much anything. But most of the plants that we're talking about will take a a fair degree of shade. So sun plants, there's a sedge for sun. There are multiple sedges for sun. Part of the reason why I love this group of plants is because there's a species for pretty much any application, whether it's a dry, rocky, sunny hillside or a wet swamp, shady swamp. There's a sedge for that.
Some other good ground covers for under trees would be ferns, native ferns. There are a lot of native ferns, Mayflower and wild ginger.
Mayapple and wild ginger. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I will second all of those. So let's see. Another one that might take a fairly. So there's a plant called ragwort, not ragweed, ragwort, or groundsel. It's a spring blooming. It's a yellow flowered spring blooming ground cover in the Packera genus, Packera. It doesn't have a very attractive common name. I apologize, but it's a great low-growing ground cover that was adapted originally for fairly swampy areas or streamside woods, but is very amenable to regular garden conditions. So fairly, not too dry, not too wet, garden soils in fairly sunny locations. That's a great spring blooming plant as well.
It also competes well with invasive plants,
Yes.
which is important.
Yes, that's
these
one that
days.
you do want to give a bit of space to, because it does like to spread. So, but if you need an area, if you have an area that needs thick cover relatively quickly, that's a good one. So let's see, not just spring bloomers, but can you think of any summer or even fall bloomers? Actually, I've got a good one. There's the blue mist flower. It was once called Ageratum corylestinum, but the plant botanist changed it over to Conoclinium. It's blue mist flower. It's a low grower, maybe 12 inches tops, that will create lovely masses of a really soft periwinkle blue flower in the fall. That's really great for migrating monarch butterflies.
That's a beautiful plant. Yeah. So anybody have any other questions?
Could you spell that?
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
let me type that into the, I'm sorry, let me type these things into the chat. Okay.
Huh.
And also, let's see, what did I say? Woodland phlox and May apple. And ginger, did you say, Marion?
Oh yeah, wild ginger. Oh, we
Now-
should mention wood poppy too.
Oh, yes.
That's blooming now, and it's so pretty. Nice foliage and beautifully bright yellow flowers in the spring is one of the first things that bloom in the spring.
And
And it will spread, and that's
Yes.
fine with me.
Mm-hmm. Stylophorum. I can't remember the specific name, but
I can't either.
I'll give you the genus. And even better, several of these species are deer resistant. I will not say deer proof. Nothing is deer proof. Every deer will try everything at least once,
Yep.
including wood poppy. I had some give my wood poppies out front a little nibble, but I don't think they'll be coming back for a second taste because it does exude a yellow latexy sap that deer find to be a real turnoff. I do recommend that everyone save the chat. I don't know if that will come through in our recording, so just in case.
It does not come through in the recording, but we can send that along as well.
Okay, excellent, excellent, yeah.
Any other questions, people?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Jean.
Is Mahonia a native plant?
Okay, so it's native to the country, but it's actually native indigenous to the Pacific Northwest. So it's a great plant, and it's great for bees.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
The birds love the drupes, and I think I heard that they were edible, but I don't want to. Okay,
No.
just leave it to the birds. It's a great plant. Not quite native to our region, but native to the country.
Yeah, it's a wonderful early plant for the bees.
Yes.
Pieris japonica.
Okay.
I know my bees love that shrub. That it's the first thing that blooms in the spring, and it's very fragrant. And I have a cute little story. I was outside early spring. They were just opening the flowers on the pieris, and I'm looking around to see where the bees are, and I didn't see any bees. And I said, "Hey guys, the flowers are starting to open. Where are you?" And 2 bees appeared.
Just like that.
And they looked
Mary
and
and
they
the bee
said,
whisperer.
yeah. And they looked and they said, "Well, that's not open enough yet." And they flew off.
Oh.
Came back a few days later when there was more opening of the flowers.
I have a question. You had mentioned earlier in your talk about, kind of referred to how long it takes for something to be defined as a native. So, certainly if something, so could you speak to that definition? How
Yes.
long does it take for something to be defined as a native? If you understand my question.
I think I do, yes. So how long does a plant have to be in a given place to be considered native? And there's no set answer. I think a lot of resources will consider a plant native to an area if it was present prior to European settlement of this country. And I think that's a fairly good rule of thumb. But as far as how long it takes, for a plant to become native, so say Japanese stiltgrass came here in the 19th century, how long will it take for that to become well integrated into our landscape? No one knows. There are very few herbivores, mammal or insect, or any other herbivore, that feed on it. And it's just going to take time for different insects or deer or whatever to develop a taste for it. And unfortunately, there's really no telling how long that might be.
And I wish the deer would develop a taste for it because it's a horrible invasive plant. I think Tallamy addressed that issue in one of his books, but I can't remember exactly what he said about how long does it take. I think he said a very, very long time.
Yeah, we're talking
hundreds of years.
And that's if they're, and that's for bugs that are a quick study.
Right.
There, let's see, there was invasive tree, Melaleuca. I don't know the common name for it, but it invaded the Everglades several hundred years ago. And to date, I don't think a single insect has figured out how to develop upon it. So hundreds of years is, for quick study insects, more like thousands of years,
Yeah.
probably. Because plants have evolved really complex and really tough to disarm chemicals that insects have to build up a tolerance for.
Mhm.
As a great example would be monarch butterflies and the milkweed. They are one of a group of very few insects that have evolved to take in those cardiac glycosides and disarm them and develop upon that foliage. I'm sorry, that's not a very satisfactory answer, but that's the best we got.
No, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Now, sorry, now that I just said that, there are some groups of plants that are more amenable, that are more easily conquered by certain insects than others. I'm thinking members of the carrot family. So in the summertime, we get the black swallowtail that loves to lay eggs on our parsley. Parsley is not a native plant, neither is fennel. Black swallowtails originally developed upon other members of the carrot family, and golden Alexanders. Golden Alexanders, which I will type the name of in the chat. That's a member of the carrot family that this swallowtail butterfly originally developed upon, but their caterpillars found a way to. Sorry?
You can say yes or no. Okay.
Oh, so they figured out a way to develop upon other members of the carrot family that are not native to this area. So, any other questions?
I have a quick question, and this has to go with corridors and biodiversity. How unique should we consider sort of the remaining open spaces in our community? I'm for right now, this weekend, I'm thinking about the Centennial Woods in Media Borough, which is about an acre of undeveloped land. And from what you've talked about today, I can assume that the mature oak trees that are there are like one of the most wonderful things that have been provided by nature. But what else is apt to be in those undeveloped spaces that would be almost impossible to replace? Because I'm not going to go out and buy a 300-year-old oak tree.
That is an excellent question. So Marian, feel free to jump in, but some things that immediately come to mind when I think of those old growth forests. So besides the aesthetic and the historical and the cultural, like all these human-centric values that we can ascribe to those woods, things that make them unique are, well, so over hundreds of years of those oak leaves and other fellow canopy and subcanopy species dropping their leaves, that those leaves are broken down to create a really wonderful, rich, moist soil that a lot of our spring ephemerals have developed on, or have evolved to really rely upon. That and the fungi species that have developed in that soil, that perhaps if there are any orchid species, we do have several native orchids in this region. They have developed complex relationships to require not only that perfectly humusy, organic, rich soil, but also they will develop in concert with fungi in the soil, to the point where if you don't have that fungi, even if you cart in all of this wonderful leaf mold into your garden, and then plant those orchids in that, if the fungi isn't there, that soil could be perfect black gold and they just simply will not survive. So the soil that has generated underneath those woodlands is a superb resource and really, really unique to old growth woodlands.
Thank you.
So it'll take a few hundred years for us in our yards to recreate those conditions, but we can start now.
Yeah, which is why it's so important to preserve these areas. I mean, everything is being built everywhere, and we've got to really stop the building because it's taking up these areas that you're talking about that are so rich in soil and rich in native plants and rich in old growth trees, and we need to preserve all of that. So whatever we can do to convince people that there are areas that need to be left wild, you know, that's really important. Any other
Okay,
questions?
should we
one-
wrap
one-
up then for today? And
One comment
For sure.
before we leave. I want to encourage you all to visit Transition Town Media's website and read the biodiversity blog, because Kelsey and I are going to be publishing every 2 weeks on the biodiversity group for more information. Yeah.
And thank you very much, everyone, for coming out and supporting this webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
and thank you, Marion and Kelsey.
Happy gardening, everybody.
Yes.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.